Morena, everybody, tēnā koutou. Welcome to Operations and Monitoring Committee from the 6th of July. I'd like to declare the meeting open and welcome everybody, including, I see Shirley Trumper, our Chair of our Rural Community Boards in the gallery, as is Ariki Tibble, who will be giving us a presentation shortly on the magic success of Crankworks, along with Councillor Donaldson. Welcome to the members of Te Tau and our Rural and Lakes Community Board. Just a reminder that we are live streaming. Please do as the chairman does and turn his mic on all the time. And we'll get underway and call for any apologies. We have two apologies, one from Mr. Baisini Tuli and Her Worship the Mayor, and I like how it's been noted up there that if you are absent from a council meeting that it's noted as to what business you're on, and the Mayor is an active member of the Mayor's task force at Local Government New Zealand, and she's in Wellington today. She'll be back this evening. So someone like to move that the apologies be sustained. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. I'm asking for any declarations of interest as per the local government guidelines. Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah. As per the agenda, Mr. Chair, I have an interest in the Crankworks report.
Councillor Donaldson, in that case, I'll ask you to join Mr. Tibble at the presenter's desk, because I know you're going to give a verbal presentation on Crankworks, and we thank you for that. Are there any other matters of or declarations of interest? There appear to be none. Thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda. Now, before anyone jumps to any conclusions, in the confidential part of the meeting, there will be an update, a report and update on the situation with the museum, and it's in confidential simply because of the reasons of possible contract implications, and certainly we don't want to signal to any future contractors what estimated costs there may be, hence the reason why that's in confidential. Are there any other items of urgent business? Councillor Gould, you surprised me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I recommend that the Council writes to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council concerning Plan Change 10, whether a decision has been made or when a decision will be made, because it will affect the monitoring committee for this council in future months. Because it's going to affect a lot of farmers around the Lake District, which could have impact on the rates being collected in the long term.
Your comments are noted. Any other items of that aren't on the agenda? I don't think we'll discuss that. I think your request will be taken up by staff, and if there is any need for that to concur, they will correspond with it. Yeah, okay, we have heard what you said. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Okay, presentation. Crankworks. Welcome, Ariki Tibble, to the presentation desk, along with our Deputy Mayor, Mr. Cycling in Rotorua, Councillor Donaldson. And whilst you gentlemen are taking your seats, congratulations on behalf of Her Worship the Mayor and Council on your hospitality award that you were granted the other night. Congratulations. So it's over to you guys. Turn your mic on, please.
I'll start with the first slide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, councillors and board members. So this is the same slide we started with last time. This is the objectives, vision and mission for Mountain Bikes Events Limited, which is a public-private partnership between Rotorua Lakes Council, Fairy Springs Holdings Limited and Takarua Mutu. And the only change since the last time we showed you this is we've updated the mission to take account of the fact that there is now a 10-year licence out to the year 2027. So that's the only change there, and I'll pass to Ariki to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Dave. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa.
Can I also just acknowledge the Deputy Chair of Mountain Bike Events Limited, Malcolm Thomas, who's just joined us.
Cool. Well, I think I thought I'd start today by just sort of revisiting the three primary outcomes that I spoke about last year. And then, last year we kind of set a bit of a benchmark, and so I can report back on some of these outcomes relative to the benchmark that we set last year. So those three outcomes were community engagement, putting Rotorua on the map as a genuine international mountain biking mecca, and then, of course, the economic benefit to the region, along with perception change. So relative to the first outcome, last year we ran a locals day. This year we ran two locals days. They weren't planned. It was the response to the weather. So leading up into the event, I'm not sure if you can all recall, but we had quite a bit of rain in the weeks leading up to it, and then punctuated with rain and a lot afterwards as well. But during the week we had a huge amount of rain. This year we had 17 events that we had to run over the course of the week, and I think only 14 of them ran as per schedule, so the rest had to run at different times. There's a huge amount of planning that goes into this event, and what tends to happen is when we have to make a change, the ripple-on effects affect so many different stakeholders and different parties. So every decision that we have to make, every change that we have to make has to be very seriously considered, and there's always a bit of collateral damage. Having said that, sometimes we stumble across a win here and there, and certainly running two locals days was a win for us this year. I think opening up the gates to locals, and that's taking on board some of the feedback of councillors from last year. I think opening up the gates are, for our local residents, just gives them a bit more buy-in and engagement with the event, and that's something we're going to carry forward to next year as well. So you can look forward to two on-site locals days at Skyline for 2018, and we've got some other plans that I'll talk about shortly as well, which are quite exciting. Kids Works, once again, this is a really big part of the event for us. We've said it in the past that running this event isn't just about mountain bikers and getting our competitors from overseas over here and giving them a good time. It's actually about engaging the entire community, and one of the ways in which we do that is by putting a lot of effort into our Kids Works setup. In 2016, we had 258 children attend that area, and in 2017 we had 362. So pieces of feedback that we get are that regularly we have been told that families are coming here specifically because they can have their kids involved and watch their kids sort of participate, and then they've got these other great things happening over on the side as well. So that is a really important part of the event that we'll carry forward. The volunteer program, well, we had 220 volunteers in 2016. That went up to 306 in 2017. That was by virtue of the extension of the number of days that the event went over. We needed a bigger volunteer resource, and 95% of the volunteers who came on board were locals. So it's pretty exciting. I know a lot of events really struggle to get volunteers along. When people hear that we have over 300 volunteers come along to this event, and that the majority of them are the vast majority are from Rotorua, it's a pretty good indication to the level of ownership that our locals feel for it. And the feedback from the volunteers is consistently good. So this year we put in a bid to take on board the National Schools Mountain Biking Champs. We managed to get 302 students along over 3 days. It's the biggest New Zealand Nationals mountain biking champs that has been over the last few years in terms of the registration numbers. And once again, feedback from students to be able to kind of participate alongside some of their heroes is a real highlight, and the grandiosity that comes to the secondary school event as a result of being part of Crankworks seems to be something that the athletes really love. This is a photo of a cross-country event which took place and started on Long Mile Road, and the 2016 world champion of the Enduro World Series actually pulled up to the start line while these guys were lined up, and there's actually a photo of him staring down the camera with a whole bunch of students next to him, and a lot of them didn't realise until they kind of turned around and saw Richie Rude ready to ride up the hill with him. So there's a number of really cool little things that happen throughout the event like that. Share the Ride, this is a program that Tuck led this year. It's really about identifying 10 local kids and their families. We tend to focus on low socioeconomic groups. And the idea about it is to actually get them out into the forest to experience the amazing resource that we have there firsthand. And they must bring their families along with them. And they attend 10 sessions, and then they get presented with a bike afterwards. So we've leveraged our sponsors to provide bikes and helmets so that they walk away not just with the skills, but actually with brand new bikes and helmets. So it's a small program, but it is a really meaningful one, and it's an important one, and one that we will continue as well. Objective 2 was putting Rotorua on the map as a genuine international mountain biking mecca. We do that through the international media that come here and the content that they push out internationally. We're still waiting on the reports to come through on the final media value. We expect that over the next few weeks as we wrap up our post-event reporting. International viewership has grown substantially, so 1.8 million in 2015, went up to 4.6 million in 2016, and we're up over 11 million for the year to date. So that's the number of eyes that are tuning in to see Crankworx Rotorua across all of the different platforms that we push information out on. So that's digital, online, and broadcast and webcast as well. We also get significant additional exposure through production that we don't produce ourselves. So the athletes obviously have pretty strong followings, and while they're here, they share a lot of content about the things that they get up to while they're in Rotorua and New Zealand. And as an example, we've put up there a example of Nikolai Regetkin, who's had 1.8 million views of his final run on the slopestyle course. Economic impact and perception change. We know that a lot of people came here for Crankworx. Once again, 95.3% of the visitors who completed the survey indicated that Crankworx was their primary reason for being in Rotorua. Average length of stay was 7.8 nights here, and that extends to 49 nights in New Zealand for the international visitors. We believe the event is helping to change people's perception of Rotorua. 67% of respondents to the survey said that Crankworx Rotorua was improving their perception of the city and the vitality of it. And unofficially, the APR report that we'd commissioned has indicated an economic impact for 2017 of 4.5 million, which brings us to a total of 14.8 million over the past 3 years. I've put up a image there of, on the left, of Eat Street, and that was taken on, I think it was the Thursday night of the event. One of the things we really want the event to do is be very successful on site at Skyline and in the other venues that it runs, but also to ignite other parts of the town as well. And one of the areas we wanted it to ignite was Eat Street. And I think that when you look at the photo and the number of people that are sort of congregating there on the Thursday night, this was the first year that we really felt that Eat Street was truly ignited. And it's quite an exciting prospect going forwards. I do need to just point out that with the APR report, I've got a sort of amateurish little diagram there on the right-hand side. What that illustrates is what is not counted in the economic impact. So each year we're not really comparing apples with apples, and the main reason for that is because we changed the format of the event. In 2017, every event took place at some point at Skyline. And 2016. In 2017, we extended the event to take place in other regions. So we had the Enduro taking place at the Village Green, out in the forest as well. And I guess the collateral from that, the collateral damage, is that there are a bunch of people who come to the event that don't get ticketed, they don't get accredited, which means they don't get counted. So we've spread some of our load across the full event time, but it means that we have to sacrifice who knows how many people for the economic impact report. So we've only counted the people that attended the Skyline site because they are the only people who are ticketed or who are accredited and who have to hand over their email addresses and contact details so we can contact them. So. Last year when we sat in front of the group here, I presented two potential futures. The one on the left was really around wrapping up the event and sailing off into the sunset, squaring away our underwrite and calling it a day. The second future that we presented was one where we went bigger, better, longer, stronger, and all of that. And as a result of the discussion with council last year and the support that followed, along with the support of other partners that we managed to work with over the months after that, we committed to that option 2. And so I thought I'd just revisit those points or those commitments that we made last year to sort of show how we have tracked against them. We spoke of a 10-year deal. Well, that's signed, sealed, and delivered. Enduro World Series, we wanted to attract that as a permanent fixture. Well, we've got it confirmed for 2017 and 2019, and the relationship there is extremely strong. Industry trade show, we launched that this year. We had 150 people attend our welcoming function, which was really focused on painting the vision for what an industry trade show could look like. How can we get these international brands to invest in Rotorua? And we've got a few things in the pipeline for next year, pulling the likes of Scion and some of the technology that's been developed there through to our major sponsors and the biking industry, so they can see that there are some groundbreaking things being developed here, and that it's worthy of some ongoing conversations. So we're hoping that catches fire in the next few years as well. Growing the international audience, well, I've already shared some of the stats there, from 4.6 million in 2016 to 11.3 million. Cultural collaboration, I've just put partially achieved for this one because it's kind of a slow burning one and ongoing, but it's a collaboration that we have with the First Nations people of Whistler, which is where the home of Crankworks is. And the CEO of their equivalent of the Te Puia Māori Arts and Crafts Institute came over and visited in November last year to try and see what sort of things were taking place over here. I think it's quite a common type of exchange that can occur, and this is a new vehicle to do it through another channel. So I've put partially achieved there because it is ongoing. Marketing to Australia, we know from our ticketing report that just for ticket purchases, so ticket purchasing spectators, not athletes, but just those spectators, that we've seen an increase from 397 Australians in 2017 to 589 in this year. Bringing on board the school program, well, it wasn't just about the National Secondary Schools Mountain Biking Champs. We also created an Educate program as well. So, for us, we've got this amazing event right on our doorstep, and if we have the opportunity to inspire secondary school students by giving them a peek behind the curtains, we have unprecedented access to all sorts of different elements of this event, and pulling them through and providing them with a bit of inspiration about what they can achieve is really important to us. So to have 174 students come through over 2 days was, again, really exciting as well, and we'll do that again next year. We aim to have 6 event organisers from around the country attend our Observer program. Same sort of a deal. It's about giving other event organisers a bit of inspiration and the belief that they can go out and attract these kind of major international events. And we ended up having 11 event organisers attend that over 3 days of the event. And then, of course, evolving the festival, we grew the number of events up to 17, and we extended the duration of the event from 5 days to 9 days. So it's quite bizarre, because I know when we first put this proposition in front of the council last year, I felt pretty anxious about that option too, about taking on board the pressures of going bigger, better, longer, harder, stronger. And it definitely feels very satisfying to be on the other end of the 12-month period, and to be able to stand in front of you and actually put my hand on my heart and say, we've achieved a large portion of what we had said we were going to do. So, yeah. Now, of course, with all the pressures and commitments that we made, I think a lot of the community engagement activations that we do, they tend to drive cost up rather than revenue up. And so we're kind of constantly dancing this line about getting the commercial revenue in and then driving up costs through these other activations that are important to us as well. Provisionally, it looks like we're tracking towards our first surplus, which is, again, something I'm pretty proud to be able to stand in front of you and say. Our idea is that any gain that we make here will be directed back towards the underwrite, and then we'll move forward to 2018. So there's still a few things to shake down, and it really comes down to just a few bits of income still trickling through from sponsors, and also a few invoices that we have to pay, which are all in international currency. So the reason it's provisional is because currency conversion can change it by a margin of kind of $2,000 to $5,000. I thought I'd finish just with a little sneak peek of what to expect for 2018. We've got the benefit of a long runway now, so we can start to have conversations with partners around long-term contracts, and we can start to continue to evolve the event year on year. So next year, what we'd love to do is to create a cross-country elite race. This would time in with the Commonwealth Games in Australia, and it would give the Australian athletes another platform to come over here and prepare themselves for the Commonwealth Games. So it'd be quite timely to integrate that event into this event. So that's one that we're gunning for. We want to continue to grow the international audience. We want to consolidate locations. So we've had a few years of trying to see how things might work in different areas of Rotorua. What we'd really like to do is have the first half of the event taking place in one location, the second half of the event taking place in a second location, and then for other little places to light up throughout the event, the week, such as each street in the village green as well. The three locations that we're looking at are either the Long Mile Road area, which has congestion issues, we're not sure, and we also understand that there's other discussions taking place with the likes of Scion and things as well that might make that difficult. The other location would be the Blue Lake. That would be a great location to be based in the first few days, and probably the most straightforward would be Waipa, side of the forest as well. It is the gateway to the forest, and it makes a lot of sense in many ways. But at any rate, we want the first 4-5 days of the event to be totally accessible for people. We want to create a vibe that people can get along and enjoy. We're going to add the 2 locals days on top of that for Skyline as well, which means that there's 3 days that will be ticketed for locals, and 5 days ticketed for any other guests, either domestic or international. We're pushing for a Trans-Tasman Enduro, given that we don't have Enduro World Series for 2018. Trans-Tasman Enduro would be a placeholder in 2018 to ensure we get that world-class caliber of athletes in that particular discipline through for the event. We want to grow sponsorships, and we've got quite an aggressive sponsorship plan in place for 2018. That'll kick off as soon as our post-event reporting is tied off. We want to continue to grow the school program. There's a few negotiations required with Cycling New Zealand on that, but we're well on track. We also another thing we stumbled upon this year was that we actually are a world-leading event in terms of our approach to medical response and concussion protocols. And members of the Enduro World Series and also Crankworks International wanted to sit with our medical response team and to talk about how a collaborative international approach could be taken to the way that concussion's dealt with in this sport. And so that's something that we'd like to push a little bit harder as well. And we're going to start off with a medical journal article that one of our doctors is going to be working on over the next few months. And we're hoping that that'll set the tone as a bit of a keynote for other mountain biking events around the world. To give you guys an idea of the concussions during mountain biking, because I know that that's one thing that people worry about. We had, I think, just over 30 suspected concussions over the course of the week. Those 30 were screened completely by our team, who are considered to be world-class leaders in the field. And there were only 6 concussions over the course of the entire event. So that's 940 athletes competing across the 9 days, and just 6 concussions, which is less than 1%. So lower than what we had thought ourselves. So that's probably the key point there. Not as low as it could be, so that's something we'll keep working on. But yeah. We are going to revisit ticketing. I've mentioned the locals days, that we're going to add a second locals day on, but we are going to revisit ticketing as well. We're doing a little bit of modelling right now to see whether we can simplify the process, bring the costs down, and do multi-day passes so it's more accessible. of course, any changes that you do to ticketing have effect for different sectors of the community as well. So we just want to try and find out where that sweet spot is. We can make it as accessible as possible for those last 3 days without compromising our revenue lines too much. So that's one of the key focuses. And that's pretty much all. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can just wrap up, there are a couple of changes the board made at the last meeting, and it's mainly to the structure of the event management crew. So Ariki will move from event manager to event director, and Tuck will take on the role of business development manager. And we see that as important because if we go back to the slide with the financials on it, that figure for MBIE funding will reduce over, we've got commitment out to 2021, but it declines each year. And so we need to replace that and try and grow the revenue. So Tuck's focus will move to trying to grow corporate revenue and the business side of it. Ariki spoke about the industry expo. We had 59% growth in revenue from the expo in 2017 over 2016. So we see the potential for further growth in that area there. I think the other thing, Ariki, right at the start, mentioned the weather challenges, and I'd just like to acknowledge the work of Martin Croft in teeing up free buses, because to secure the turf, we closed Rowie Street Reserve, which was a big hole in our access for parking during the event. So, yeah, any questions?
Before we ask any questions, Councillor Donaldson, would you just like to explain your role in your involvement in Crankworks?
So I'm a director of Mountain Bike Events Limited, appointed by Tuck Mutu, and I also chair the board. I guess one thing that I would point out with the new roles for Tuck and Ariki, the board has, there's been some questions raised by one or two funders of, Tuck being a shareholder and also the owner of the event management company, and also holding a hands-on role in the event. And MBIE have reserved the right to have an observer at all board meetings. They've never taken that up, and that's principally due to the relationship that Ariki manages with New Zealand major events and the meticulous reporting that he's done. But it can be an issue for some trust funders where they see a potential conflict there. So we've taken the step of approaching a remuneration advisor to size the remuneration for those two roles, so the event director and the business development manager. And we're told we could expect a bit of a fright when we get the answer back, but for probity's sake, we're taking that step.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Metapeka Raukawa-Tate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Morena Ariki. I suspect that in 5 years, the bottom line there will look different, and obviously through the efforts that you're putting in right now. I just want to ask you, do you monitor how long the overseas participants stay in the country? The reason I ask, quite early into the event, I was at the airport, and there were some five young men, Americans, or Canadians, I think, heading off to Tasmania. And they said, I went over and spoke to them because I thought, gosh, they're going quite early. And they said there was an event in Tasmania that they were heading off to. So do we actually monitor how long those overseas participants stay? And were we aware that there was an event that some of them were going on to? Because it seemed there might have been a bit of an overlap somehow there.
Yeah, I mean, we do monitor, I mean, I don't know if monitor is the right word, but we do survey the participants to see what their behaviours are leading into the event. And for the enduro athletes themselves, we did have their contact details, so they were part of the survey. And we had a reasonable sample in the APR report of enduro athletes. And I say enduro specifically because the event that they were going to was the second stop on the Enduro World Series Tour for 2017. The idea about having another Southern Hemisphere tour stop was one that we contributed to with the Enduro World Series. We felt that if there are two locations in the Southern Hemisphere bidding for the event, that it increases the value proposition for athletes who are coming all the way from Europe. It is really tough to convince international athletes to come all the way down here when the bulk of their events are taking place in Europe. So if we can increase the value proposition that way, then it makes sense. The idea about us being the first stop, though, was to allow us to have people come here early. And if you have a look at the APR report findings, the enduro athletes, athletes in general who have come from the international markets, were spending on average 40 nights here. And that's, I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head whether that's in Rotorua and New Zealand, but I do know that they 40 nights. On average, each enduro athlete has a team of about 8. So those are the people who were not counted in the economic impact. So that's a bit of a bugbear for me. It's why I raise it, because you've got, for every one person who is counted in the survey who left early, like you saw, there's probably another 5 to 8 who were not counted in the economic impact, which means it's a conservative figure. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
And just on the subject of surveys, they cost money, and we have to pay for them. But it is something that we'll always, in our relationship with CEI and Whistler, attempt to remain the first stop on the Crankworx World Tour, because it does bring the Northern Hemisphere athletes down here in their off-season to sharpen up ahead of the forthcoming season. And so some of those enduro athletes that Ari talked about, they competed in enduros in Nelson and Queenstown before coming up to Rotorua, which is why MBIE, New Zealand Major Events and Tourism New Zealand, have supported us in the past. There are benefits to NZ Inc. from the event.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, congratulations to all concerned. Personally, a huge success. Especially growing a 9-day, it used to be a 5-day event to 9 days and 17 events. I think that's fantastic. The question I have is, wonderful Paul Fiddy down at the Village Green that I was involved in, and you mentioned about possibly involving a bit more cultural area, which is the First Nations from Canada. Would they be considering coming out and being involved there, or are they only involved in their one in Whistler? And would the board then consider hosting it more at Te Puia or at Tamate Kapua instead of, say, on the Village Green?
It is very likely that they'll end up sending a delegation over. We would be absolutely keen to do something like that at Te Puia or Tamate Kapua. So I think the answer is yes to both of the questions.
Finally, Councillor Gould.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your report. I know you guys can't control the weather, so it's a pity we had wet weather. But I'm going to talk about slide number 2, putting Rotorua on the map, when you had the media at 121 people and 61 international people. If you do reports to future sponsors and people who advertise with you people and getting more people involved, you should be able to do a breakdown when media register. They'll give you their name, the organisation they are with, and the country they are with. So you could say to them, well, we've got 40 countries covered from around the world, which might be of more interest to them than 61 international people. And also different media people might have 2 or 3 or 4 people representing the same company, like the Daily Post might have sent out 2 photographers and 2 reporters or 3 reporters, where 121 media would have been better to have a breakdown, so you know that you've got sources from, say, 40 different types of companies, and you'll be able to tell which type of companies, whether they're TV or media, or you might be able to see from that results where your holes are, where you could contact different people overseas and say, hey, we've got this fantastic event and we believe that you should be covering it. I'm just trying to help you to get future better coverage overseas as well as New Zealand and Australia.
Thanks, Councillor Gould. We do have that information, and as an example of something that has happened on that front in 2017. We identified a publication out of North America called Free Hub Magazine. They have a following in North America of about 60,000 people, which is considered small in the industry, but the types of publications that they're putting out are content rich. With the support of Tourism New Zealand, we had journalists from Free Hub who came over, so we provided the introduction to Tourism New Zealand. They covered the cost of their flights, and they came to our shores and they did articles on some of the local heroes here in town. So that's one example of how we have activated exactly down the line that you're suggesting there. So I definitely appreciate those comments, and that's on our on the boil for us for sure.
Mr. Bob Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, please. This is being done in a positive frame of mind, and congratulations on your possible black figure of credit. So that's well done. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to ask the question, please. Land use resource consent, who is the holder and do you have one? Because when you get into this situation, some ugly heads start to pop up.
Yeah, so we are fortunate to have a good relationship with Ngāti Whakaui Tribal Lands and Rotorua 2D North Trust, and we work actively with those two landowners about access, and we have met with Ngāti Whakaui Tribal Lands Board and also the Rotorua trustees on that. In terms of moving dirt, all that is consented through Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So the construction of the jumps, all that sort of thing, has all been monitored in terms of the metrics around the earth that's being moved, and also silt runoff and those sorts of issues. So, yeah, we're...
Chairman, if I may again, please. As I said, I'm in a positive frame, not a negative. It might be wise to go down the line of see what a land use consent can be applied for and who should be the holder of it, so that you know then that you've got an event that you can go out for 5 years, 25 years or whatever it is, and you've set your parameters. It's a suggestion only, because I understand you're dealing with 3 or 4 owners, and it might be complicated at the moment, but get it done if you can, please.
Take that on board, thank you.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ricky and Councillor Donald, for your report. Just wanted to know that while it's really good for Rotorua Inc. to benefit from all the activity of Crankworks that's happened in the last couple of years, and I believe for the next 10 years it's continue to with the drive and initiative that's been shown forward. My question is there any way we can have like a parade activity in town so that people can come over and see all the athletes? And the other thing that I'd like to see is that if the event was held in the city as well, if one of the enduro events or competitiveness, so that the town businesses could directly, like the cafes, the hospitality industry during the day would benefit rather than just wait for nighttime. There are a lot of businesses in the, like the cafes and all that, don't open after hours. So the whole flow that just goes towards pig and whistle and that time. But to create a bit of buzz and atmosphere, I just wanted to know if there was something like that planned for the city.
Good question.
Please.
I'll let Ricky talk about future plans. For 2017, the Enduro World Series race was based at the Village Green. So we had the porphyry there, the opening ceremony there, and the athletes started and finished their riding out to the forest and riding back in there. You saw the photo of Eat Street, so that was Fox previewed or premiered a movie that they've developed, and so that was the Eat Street activation. We also have the, not the Dirt Diaries, the Deep Summer Photo Competition. So we held that on the big screen in Manawa, or City Focus, on the night of the night market, which fortunately was beautiful weather, and so there was good attendance in that. And so Ari can talk about city activation going forward.
Yeah, I think I really like the suggestions that you've made there, Councillor Kumar, and To me, timing is everything. The activations that we did in year 1 and year 2 didn't fly as well as we wanted them to. And they'll probably be more likely to fly in future as the kind of gravity of the event builds and becomes, resonates in the minds of our locals more and more. So we are totally open to that, and that's one of the leverage activations that we are really passionate about within the internal team. But again, timing is everything, so it's really a case of, you don't want to go down the track of setting up a parade and only having 10 people turn up. It's, we have to do it at the right time, and we'll keep our finger on the pulse with that to see what we can do. But I really like that specific suggestion as well. I think that would be awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Riki. In fact, there's been some really good suggestions around the table this morning. Finally, Councillor Tapsell. Mr. Waddy, did you have your hand up? Okay. Finally, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Firstly, I would like to actually support Councillor Maxwell's suggestion of Te Puia as well. I noticed, cultural collaboration was only partially completed, and while I think it's amazing that we've got Māori carvings and we intertwine the culture with the environment when we're selling Rotorua, because it is our unique selling point, it would be fantastic to see that collaboration from the start in a planning, and well, let's actually have it here in our culturally important areas. Secondly, congratulations on your continued success. It's wonderful to see you actually starting to break even as well. But I am still very mindful that Crankworks Rotorua is the only one that still charges. So when I think about the affordability of our families to attend, I am concerned about it. And I'd like us as council to seriously consider this issue. Council is a major shareholder. We've got 49% shareholding in this event. So therefore, I'd actually like to request that our Chief Executive look at options to help ensure that our families are able to afford to attend, and do that alongside the organising committee. But as a 49% shareholder, I think we do as council have a responsibility to ensure that our families are able to attend, they can afford to attend, and they can enjoy this event, this wonderful event, just as much as all the international visitors.
Like to comment on that, Dave?
No, I'm probably conflicted in that space in terms of council revisiting the direction we have to try and break even, return a surplus and perhaps repay some of the underwrite. That's entirely for elected members to give that direction, and so we look forward to it. But we as Ariki said, we have had suggestions around the price and setting the ticket price. We've looked at comparable festivals such as Rhythm and Vines and other festivals that young families attend, and we think that our offering is in line with that. But I take on board Councillor Tapsell's comments and have no issue with those comments whatsoever. That's if we want the shareholder wants to give us a direction to consider that. We've got our AGM coming up. We'll take that into account.
Thank you. Would someone like to move a vote of thanks to... Sorry, one? Oh, no, we're over. We've had 3/4 of an hour. Thank you. Would someone like to move a vote of thanks to Mr. Riki and Councillor Donaldson for their report and wish them all the best for your future considerations? Move, Councillor Kawatate. Seconded, Councillor Hunt. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Best wishes. Councillor Hunt, the next item on the agenda on page 6 is Councillor Hunt's report back from the Freshwater Management Symposium of Local Government New Zealand. A very topical item at the moment in terms of the political landscape as well. I just wondered, Councillor Hunt, is there any matters in your report that you would like to highlight, in particular pertaining to where Council is in terms of its water issues?
I think really I'm happy to take questions because I think that will flow out of that. I'm happy to move that my report be tabled, yes. Thank you, and it's probably easier if I simply answer questions because it was such a full symposium.
Just while people are thinking of their questions, Councillor Hunt, I've got to say it is an absolutely comprehensive report, and certainly I hope Mr. Michael and the water team take on board some of the or are aware of some of the issues, I'm sure they are, and the ways forward where people in the science industry see the water. I find Lawrence Yule's comments quite ironical, having taken responsibility for the issue there now wants to be a member of Parliament. So that's quite, I find that quite interesting. Are there any questions? Councillor, Mr. Bob Martin.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, congratulations on the report. It was well done. It was a fairly high, powerful report, though, irrespective of who was there and making submissions to the report. Apart from Landcorp, who I don't class as being in the farming fraternity, was there any farmers, representatives there, like Federated Farmers, anyone like that taking part?
I believe they may well have spoken on day 2. I think probably what did come out from Landcorp, and I mentioned that I found Stephen Carden the most inspiring speaker, was they're leading the change to look at land use. And one of the comments was remembering what we had forgotten, which was multi-use of the land on a farm, where you'd have some cropping, you'd have some cattle, you'd have sheep, you'd have various other things, and some trees, and that it wasn't simply doing it on a small scale as small farms had previously, but that this could be done on a very large scale, and that they were leading that. They were also leading, as I mentioned, deer. They were milking deer. They did say if you wanted a latte, it would cost you about $35 to have deer milk in your latte, but it's a high-end product. So things that really were coming quite left of field. So I felt that they were leading that. There were a number of people representing all of those farming bodies in the audience. This was the most well-attended symposium on water. It surprised everybody, the interest. And certainly every time I listen to national radio, it's on water. Who's selling it? Should we be charging for it? Where's it going? This morning I heard we only collect 2% of the water that falls out of the sky nationally. So it is an enormous issue that each region is having to deal with. And one of the success stories that came out was in one region where there was allocation and often droughts, that all the consent holders actually then combined their consents and they managed that take between them, so that because they had differing needs in different times, so as opposed to everybody taking everything in case it ran out and then it running out, they managed it so it didn't run out. So, and that's that's putting the control over that resource to the very people who use it, and they managed it well. Another issue that was highlighted was when bore water was getting low, or the take from the river was getting low, and they took bore water. Instead of using the bore water to give to the families or those who needed it, they actually put the bore water back in the river so they could continue to take the clean water. So there's a whole lot of different thinking going on around water. It is an issue we will need to consider. And the most telling comment, which I think I highlighted in my report, is that councillors as a general, we don't think about water issues, we don't campaign on water issues. It's not something our community has in the past been particularly interested in, but actually the consequences of a waterfowl, and Hastings and Havelock North are our most recent example, are catastrophic. So this is the sort of conversation that we'll need to be having, and our community needs to have with us as much as we need to listen to their concerns. So there will be some standards coming out in the future, I would expect, from central government.
Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Just to go to Mr. Carden, Stephen Carden of Landcorp, they also, Mr. Chairman, are milking sheep. It's a $3.5 million outlay. They have pretty good resources to get to money to do these sort of things, but what I'm leading to is that we need that sort of ideas coming out of people who are prepared to spend the money to find out where the possibilities we can go with retention of looking after our lake. So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just interested in the comments there of Doug Leader, Chair of the Regional Sector of LGNZ and also Chair of Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And one matter that I've highlighted with our Chief Executive is I think we need to work closely with Regional Council and also make a formal submission to their next long-term plan in respect of stormwater management, because we're seeing, I believe, the effects of climate change, but also the effects of stormwater in the last season that we've had, the lake levels, lakeside erosion, but Lake Rotorua and Lake Okaraka, and they control the outlets for both of those lakes, and we need to be thinking about protecting our land and our lake margins. So I think it's important that we work with Regional Council, but also put it on the table that we'd like an increased focus in the management of those lake levels going forward.
Suggestion, I hope staff have made a note of that, because I think it's important that we are at the table for these long-term plans, because the impacts of their decisions on their ratepayers, but they're also our ratepayers, are quite profound, and lake levels is a huge issue on the lake margin. So thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Rowe, Mr. Martin? I'll just take a question from Councillor Rowe-Kawatake, then I'll come back to you, Mr. Martin.
Yes, thank you. I understood it was a 2-day symposium, Karen, and you only attended on the 1 day, was that correct?
Yes, I returned for John Chadwick's funeral.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sorry,
Yes.
yes. Because, symposium, Mr. Chair, is it's fine, but it's the rigorous debate, because everybody's presenting their view from their perspective, from where they sit in the scheme of things, but the rigorous debate that needs to be had, because you're getting information presented to you, and I don't know when that occurred, because that's really the crux of it, I think. That's where we start to pull things apart and either agree to disagree or start to get some common consensus around some of these significant issues, because I think you are in error, Karen, when you say we as a council, and certainly some people within our community, they've been very concerned for many years and have done a lot of work in this area, actually. And you can see that through some of the iwi involvement and certainly the iwi leaders group. So, but yes, it's the rigorous debate. When is that going to happen? Did you get some indication from that?
I can say all of the symposium presentations are now online, and I will send that link out to my colleagues. Yes, that was not the comment was not intended that way, Councillor Okawa-Tate. It was simply that it is a conversation that a small pocket are having a lot of conversation around, and iwi are doing a vast amount of work, and yet generally, other than for us clean water and our lakes, it isn't so much about, it's about our potable water supply as well, and how well are we looking after that, and how well do we understand those risks if there's a failure. So it was in that context.
So if I can just ask a question before you, Mr. Martin. A symposium to me, it's a talk fest, and everyone's putting their ideas and their views. But when is the engagement going to occur in terms of some policy settings on a national, regional and local basis? When will that discussion occur? Do you know, Councillor Hunt?
I don't have the answer to that, Councillor Sturt, but certainly Nick Smith was there, the Minister for the Environment, and as I said, every conversation I hear, and every day there's something in print media, online and on the radio about water. So this is a conversation that is gaining momentum, and I would expect that government, whether it's I would expect post-election, that we'll start seeing some things out, but that's only an assumption.
I think in the observation of this symposium, there are a lot of agendas on the table, and the economic, the land use, and the change that would occur, and that's why I asked, when are the policy settings going to be set out either in a white or green paper? I thought Nick Smith may have given that indication, because regionally you can't have like with like. I mean, the issues on water in Rakaia are totally different to the issues of water in the Bay of Plenty as they are in Northland. So I just wondered, will there be more symposiums along this rather than some policy settings?
I think there'll be both, and certainly the fact that different responses were required, and the example that Nick Smith used was in riparian plantings, because it's quite, yes, we all want them everywhere, but the topography is different, what plants are native to that area is quite different, and that you can't simply have a one-size-fits-all. So it is recognition of the different areas that these are being worked in, and there will be considerable work done in this space. There's no doubt, and certainly iwi are doing a considerable amount already in this space. Just on that note, if I may say, Tina Perot gave the room a really good rack up, is probably the word I'd used. She challenged the working collaboratively, and I have to say that I think that we are leading the charge here with our partnership, and the Te Arawa strategy group, Lake Strategy Group, is a really good example of that, and we've been doing it for a very long time, but a lot of other councils are really only just getting into that space where they need to recognise the needs and the desires of iwi are just as important to everyone else around the table, and that when you add their voice, the outcome is better for the whole community.
Councillor Martin, just before you ask your question, I mean, you're correct, Councillor Hunt. It's not a 5-minute thing. I mean, the Bay of Plenty Catchment Board has been operating for over 50 years, and riparian right planting isn't something that's just been invented. That's been conducted in this catchment for at least the last 40 years that I know of. It could be longer, but Councillor Martin's probably got more knowledge on that than I have. So, yeah, I mean, there has to be a huge debate on this issue right across the board. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to support Councillor Donaldson with his recommendation going back to Regional Council. I speak on behalf of the Rural Board. We haven't discussed it ourselves in a forum or anything like that, but I'm sure I'd get the support from our farmers. We have a major problem, and it was about 3 years ago I put a submission into this council about people wanting to access paper roads and bicycle tracks and things like that. And one part of my submission, Mr. Chairman, was the fear that because there's no toilets on those particular blocks or pieces of land, giardia might sneak into our water supplies. Because a lot of our water supplies, as you would realise, are not town supplies, they're private. But I have an email here from Regional Council about certain things that's just taken place in our district about water flow. Two people totally contradict one another. So I support what you're saying, Dave, and bring it on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Very thorough report there. Can I ask a question on Lawrence Yule's presentation? He said they're now spending $12 million to treat all drinking water. Did he indicate what they were currently spending per year?
No, he didn't, but I think as is further in the report, the issues that they had was kind of a whole lot of things lined up. It's a bit like the Swiss cheese analogy people use, that they had different people measuring, different people testing the water. Nobody really knew what they were doing and which supplies. None of them were, I believe none of them were chlorinated, and there had been previous issues raised, but there was no record of that, and those staff involved in previous incidents had left. So it highlighted record keeping, understanding the complete flow of, pardon the pun, of that system, and making sure that all those checks and balances were done regularly. It was not simply checking that the lids were on tight. So it highlighted a systemic failure of asset management, and they're now paying for it. Yeah.
I think we undersell what Rotorua has done to future-proof our water supplies. We've got chlorination in every system. We have the UV treatment at every supply to kill the cryptosporidium and the giardia that chlorine doesn't kill. Now, that was only recently in the last 6 years that was put in every supply progressively. So the integrity of our water is probably at the high end. And the supply that I understand in Havelock North neither had chlorine, neither did it have UV treatment, so the risks were high. Now, this was exactly what we experienced in Nongata 30 years ago. We had no chlorine and no UV in our water in Nongata, and our water was perfect. But because of development, land use change, more residential development, the opportunity of pipes being broken, etc., council as a body could not guarantee that Giardia, Cryptosporidium and those other diseases from animals, ruminants, would not come through the system. So the councils of 20, 30 years ago, or even in the last 5 or 6 years, with advice from Eric Court and the team, who took a hammering from the community in terms of putting these chemicals in the water supply to protect the potability. They took a hammering publicly, and a lot of us took a hammering politically from it. But in the end, we have had very few incidences of the magnitude that Hastings have had. We did before they were treated, but this council took the initiative. So it's been moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Mr. Stanton, that the Freshwater Management Symposium record be approved. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt. It's unfortunate you couldn't do the day too, but we understand. It was lovely to have you back. Right, on page 13, a confirmation of the minutes of the Operation and Monitoring Committee meeting held on the 1st of June. Could I have a mover for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Seconded, Councillor Donaldson. Are there any questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now move to staff reports on page 18. Is that right? Yep. You move the recommendation that the financial performance for the 11 months ended 31st of May 2017 be received. Welcome, Mr. Collet, and we look forward to your report, in particular in response to the headlines in the sensational headlines in the Daily Post. I'd thank you, Councillor Hunt. Mr. Collet, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So Council, this is a financial update for the 11 months to the end of May, because obviously that's the financial reporting that we've finished, but also going to give you an update of where we're forecasting to be and an update on our end-of-year debt position, because obviously the end-of-year took place a few days after the compilation of this report. From an operating perspective, at the end of May, 2 million behind budget and forecast to be 2.3 million at the end of the year. So driven again by the museum closure, the waste management transition costs and the reinstatement costs resulting from the storms that took place in February and March. So our intention was always to work towards trying to absorb the financial impact of those events. However, it has proven a little bit more difficult than we anticipated, in particular as a result of trying to absorb those storm costs so late in the financial year. From a capital expenditure perspective, 32.3 million year to date at the end of May, forecast to be 34.5 million. So it will be 4.9 million over budget, as we've talked about nearly every month, mostly down to the timing of the library hub and the acquisition of the museum off-site storage facility. I think the thing though is, as I've put there, it's a very high completion rate of CapEx, and so if you look at it over the last 3 years in particular, and where we sit, so 2015 was 19 million capital spend, 2016 was 23, and 2017 has seen a significant lift in the amount of capital spend. So again, nearly half, a 50% increase on last year. Why is it as high as it is? There's been a significant investment into our infrastructure. So if you were to peel away that 34.3 million, there's some significant projects in there, and investment in our infrastructure. So, as an example, the Aquatic Centre renewal, 600,000, the EEC roofing and new renewal issues, 500,000, 1.6 million into open spaces, that's parks and reserves, the library building, 6 million. Roading alone was $7.5 million investment in roading, so as an example, and and so on and so on. And I think the big one, the big issue for us this year has been we've tried to do a lot, and we've actually succeeded in doing a lot, in particular against previous years. However, that's come at a cost, and it has come at a cost with regards to borrowing, and so the report was forecasting a $5.5 million increase in borrowings, so we did end the year a little bit better off, 4.6 million, and slightly more cash on hand. But just to put it into perspective with regards to the overall movement of the group, with regards to council and the airport, is that while we have increased by 4.6, the airport did reduce by 1.5. And so therefore there's a net $3 million increase in borrowings for the year. So a bit better than what we were forecasting in the report. I think the big one though is, because as during the year we were forecasting no increase in borrowings, is that the position of having to borrow at the end of the year is down to a couple of things really. So the first one is our ability to try and absorb those operating results with regards to the museum closure and the storms and the transition costs. And because we haven't been able to offset all of those, that obviously has a flow-on impact to our cash. And also the timing of our capital spend and the flowing of money in and out. And we've seen a bit of a change in the pattern of the cash outflow this year. So in the previous year, for example, a lot of the work was completed at the end of the financial year, which meant the following year we were paying the cash flow going out, and that hit us this year. This year, as an example, a lot more of the work was done earlier in the year, which meant that we don't have that tail that flows on into the following year. And so you've got a bit more cash going out this year as a result. And so we've been impacted by those two factors, which have contributed to that position. I think it's important, though, to put a little bit of context to that as well. So, and I think if we go back to the long-term plan, where we set out our financial strategy for 10 years and we set out our borrowings for 10 years, and that's ultimately the benchmark that we hold ourselves against. And what I've done here is just a little bit of a comparison. So the box there on the left, 2016, you'll see that the LTP had us planning to borrow 7 million and the airport reducing, so a net increase of borrowing of 5.5. But overall, we reduced our borrowing by 3.4. So obviously there was a good reduction against where we thought our LTP was. 2017, so the year that's just been, again, council anticipated in the LTP to increase its debt, the airport reduce, and so we are slightly over for that year. But when you combine the 2 years together, and so in the LTP, where we anticipated to borrow 6.3 million across 2 years, and where we've actually ended up with regards to still overall reducing by 300,000, I think it's still a pretty good result. So yes, it's disappointing that we have had to borrow this year, but I think when you compare it to the LTP and where we thought we would be in this time of year, we are still much better off. And in fact, as I said, there is still a $6 million improvement on where we expect it to be in our long-term plan. So with that, any questions?
Mr. Colley, you talked about the one-off transition costs for the refuge. Is it a one-off? Or will the 2017-18 refuse rate have a clawback to pay for those costs? And if there is a clawback, will that be reduced in 2018?
They are one-off. So, as you recall, we transitioned partway through the year. We had multiple contractors working at the time. So we had our previous supplier of Rotorua contracting assisting our new contractors to make sure that the the process was seamless. During the months as well, where we had residents come forth and say they hadn't received their wheelie bins and resolving issues, you've had variations to contracts as a result of those teething problems and getting it right. And so they are contained this year, and we don't anticipate them to occur again going forward.
Question.
The
Question
clawback?
was-
No, there is no clawback.
Okay, all right. And the other one is, in your experience as a financial advisor to us, has our capital works program or our capital spend been too ambitious?
No, it's not too ambitious. I think it's as the organisation, we've tried to make sure that we work towards ensuring that our infrastructure is at the level required, and accepted by our community, and we've worked very hard towards that. So, we've tried to do a lot, and we've done a lot, and I don't think it's been too ambitious.
Chairman, thank you for your report, Thomas. Those slides you just put up, we're taking it just dated the 30th of June 2017, aren't we?
Correct.
First question.
Yep.
Now, the second question, one of your slides indicated a transport cost of $7.5 million. Have you taken into account subsidies from NZTA or different other agencies for the transport costs?
Well, we do take those into account, but we are showing you the total that spend that makes up that 34 million. So obviously the transport subsidies help fund that, yes. But that is the...
your credits aren't really shown in that transport cost? Am I right in saying?
No, but
they're in the bank account,
Correct.
but not in that figure.
No, that's right.
What were the figures roughly? About 4 or 5 million?
For that, yes, probably about that, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. If you compare the financial results on page 18 with the financial report at the end of April for the same figures, I note that staff expenditure has gone from 115,000 below budget to 571,000 over budget in 1 month. Could the Chief Executive please explain to me how you can possibly have a staff expenditure blowout of 686,000 in 1 month?
I'll happily answer that one on behalf of the Chief Executive. So, unfortunately, this is resulting from a system issue that we have been aware of. So we did change payroll systems just before Christmas. In February, I was aware that it wasn't accounting for the annual leave provisioning correctly. It was obviously paying staff correctly and recording other things correctly. We made an allowance for what we thought was the shortfall that the system was not quite getting right, and last month we have fixed it, and so that movement has reflected the annual leave movement as a result of fixing that issue.
I find it very hard to believe 686,000 attributed just to that factor. However, you're the Chief Financial Officer. My next question is how many full-time equivalent staff members do we actually have, including CCOs, at this current point in time? This was to have been reported on a regular basis to this council, and I am not seeing those figures.
Unfortunately, I don't have those numbers on hand, particularly for the CCOs. You will recall that, yes, we were reporting that through a dashboard. One of the reasons why we hadn't been reporting that through the dashboard was, again, it was difficult to get those figures out of our payroll system, and we're working on resolving that and making sure that comes back. But my understanding from our people and capability team is that our FTEs are in line with our cap and our expectations.
Once you get that information, I just wondered if you could share that with us by email. I think that is a fair request. We have been asking for it. There have been other issues why we haven't got it. Mr. Waru.
Thank you. I would request that we have that full FTE information presented with us with next month's report, please, so that we actually get it formally.
Councillor Kent, I've asked Mr. Colley, once he gets that information, to share it with us direct. But the point you raised of having it in the report, he's already acknowledged that it should be here. He told us why it isn't here. I think we have to accept it. So I think it will go back to being the norm that the FTEs will be reported in every 6 weeks.
Thank you. Just coming to the issue of the capital expenditure, on page 20, you're reporting there extra borrowings of 5.5 million to the end of June. I believe on your slides there that was reduced by 1.5 million from the airport. What is the impact on this in terms of what the borrowings are likely to be at the end of next financial year, based on the fact that we've just approved an annual plan only a matter of days before we heard about this budget blowout?
Go out, because that's his opinion, just on the facts that he requires.
Well, I guess, Councillor, the impact is that that's a further net $3.5 million of debt on the council's books. So obviously that will have a financial impact with regards to financing costs that we need to account for. I guess ultimately though, it's we do have a significant amount of work ahead of us next year, $47 million worth of capital spend, which will result in about $7 million of borrowing. Ultimately, if council feel that they wish to reduce that debt figure, then you can obviously ask us to review our program next year and see if we can pull it back if that is your desire. Obviously that'll have an impact on levels of service. Yep.
Yes, exactly. Mr. Wari?
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, kia ora tātou. Morena. Kia ora, Thomas, tēnā koe. Just in regards to the, I noticed that the big, I suppose the elephant in the room about the museum being the thing that's been costing us the most there. Have you taken into account that when you've done your figures for the next budget coming up?
Correct. We have corrected that. I think the issue was, just to explain it, why it's been such a big impact this year is that the museum, with regards to its admission revenues, makes most of its revenue in the November to March period. That's where by far the bulk of it does, but it obviously incurs expenditure across the 12 months. So you had a period whereby for 5 months we incurred expenditure, very little revenue, and then the museum was closed right at the start of the peak period, and that's why we've had such a significant impact with regards to the reduction in revenue.
Mr. Donaldson? Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Wadu again.
Kia ora. Just and one last question. Now, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm like a dog with a bone. I'm always reading about these property sales, and I think Thomas knows where this corridor is going. I was wondering when we are going to receive that the policy for the property sales, for disposal policy. I know you've spoken to a few people about it, but you've yet to actually come to Te Tatau Te Arawa ki te whakatakoto.
So the policy was provided to Tātou a couple of months ago, and feedback has been received, and we're just working through that feedback and in the process of writing a report to bring to council.
Mr. Wadu?
Kia ora. I was meaning, when are you going to come to Te Tatau ki te whakatakoto to talk to it? And will we be part of the final sign-off of that policy?
Yes, we can do that. Yep.
Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Thomas. Just your slide there with the 3 years. I think it was second to last one. It might be that one. So in terms of our policy of only funding 85% of the capital projects, are you saying with that we're meeting that? Because it's easy to get bogged down in 1 year when projects get brought forward and timing and that sort of thing. Across 3 years, how are we tracking in terms of that 85%?
Through you, Chair, yes, we are fitting within that envelope, but however it is proving, it's going to become more difficult going forward to do that because of some of the scale of the projects that we are doing, and as we've noticed that there's a bit of a capability lift in areas as well. So we are delivering a lot more than what we have in the past as well. So that is going to be a key discussion as part of this next long-term plan as to whether it stays at 85% and whether it needs to shift and what the financial implications of that will be. But currently at the moment we're quite comfortable fitting into that.
Donaldson, Councillor Okawa-Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought I heard something that, and so I just want to make sure that I didn't get this wrong, but that any policies for sign-off and for discussion and debate and for sign-off come before the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee. So I just want to make that sure. They don't go somewhere else first and then come for us for the sign-off. They actually come to us, you know, to the subcommittee of council, standing committee of council. So unless I heard something incorrectly there. That was in relation to, thank you.
To Tato, I think that's
So through the chair, you're quite right. The process that has been followed in this policy is Tato has or was actually provided with a draft of the policy for some feedback. And you're quite correct that the feedback is currently being looked at, and certainly the committee will be the next decision-making body, if you like, that will consider the sign-off ultimately of the policy with the recommendation to council.
I think the point Mr. Waru was making, Mr. Williams, is those discussions haven't occurred.
I'll be clear, I understand that Tato was actually provided with a draft of the policy for comment, and in fact we have received comment back from Tato or the representatives of Tato on that policy.
What I wanted to just clarify here is that e tika tō kōrero, kai te tika tēnā. Engari, because we've been asking for it for so long, and because we've been, since last year in fact, so I thought it was just going through with that request. I know we had a draft kōrero sent to a few of our executive executive officer, and just wondering how far that's gone. So, and when can we expect to have that tabled? Is that at the next SPNF meeting, is it?
Mr. Williams already answered that, Mr. Waru, by saying that is being looked at the moment, the response, and that a paper will come back to SPNF, to Councillor Okawa-Tate's committee, encompassing or taking into account those views. Are you saying that they haven't been consulted?
No, I'm just saying that we've yet to see it tabled at one of the huis, and so
well,
when
Mr.
is that going to happen?
Given an undertaking
because we've been asking for that for a while on both committees.
Okay. At Councillor Okawa-Tate's next meeting, that policy will come up, I understand. Councillor Hunt?
I just wondered, Thomas, whether you could comment on the capability that has been lifted and where that has happened, or whether that's something the Chief Executive might comment on.
The capability there is the focusing on the establishment of a project management office in particular, and honing in on project management capability within the organisation, and just making sure that the framework and the skills are there, and as a result we're seeing a positive lift in that capability, and a higher level of completion and better results as a result of that work.
Would someone like to move, put the motion? Oh, Mr. Waddy? Oh, you're moving it? It's been moved by Councillor Okawa-Tate, seconded by Mr. Waddy, that the report, financial performance for the 11 months ended 31st of May 2017 be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Next one is page 21 in your agendas, which is the operational report, which first one up is Kaitiaki Māori. Got a note here, Monty's on leave, but he's turned up today. Welcome, Monty.
Double P.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any matters in the report or subsequent matters that have come up that you want to talk to us about?
No, I'd just like to submit my report as written, but just to make a comment that, as reported last time, the noho marae has happened, and that it was wonderful to have Councillor Mark Gould there for the duration. So just for other councillors who might be interested in coming, the next one is in August. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
I was out of town when the Māori All Blacks were in Rotorua, and I was lucky enough to go down to the exhibition at the Energy Event Centre on the last day before they backed up. Now, I think it's worth recording that the Māori jersey was named after Mitamohi. And I didn't know that, and I don't know that the public knows that, but that is just a huge honour from somebody who actually represented New Zealand at rugby league to have a Māori All Black jersey named after and to depict his whakapapa or whatever it does depict. But it was a gorgeous jersey, and I just think that's worth noting that the game was held here in Rotorua, and they chose an iconic Rotorua person to name their jersey after. And they've named every other jersey up till now after a person of prominence.
Yes, I think that was particularly inspirational on their behalf and the NZADA, RFU, and of course the New Zealand Māori Board, New Zealand Māori Rugby Board. When asked when they were here, yes, they felt they couldn't go past making something iconic and chose, of course, Mitamohi, as we know, more particularly in and around the contribution that he's made to now 2 or 3 generations of young Māori people who are now adults and have children on their own, now attending courses that are run by his former students, and at Aiakeel in particular.
Any questions of Mr. Morrison? Councillor Donaldson, Mr. Waru.
Not a question. I'd just like to congratulate Monty on leading the giant haka in his Brave Blossom shirt during the All Black stay here, and it's probably not a question for Monty, but it'd be great to know how far out it'll be before we get our Guinness World Record attempt ratified.
Well,
at some point in the
Masterton one
future.
has never been ratified, so we're leading the chase at the moment. Monty?
Yes, that is correct. It'll be some time before we know. Look, and you're right. We won't know until they've finished their processes. But from the team monitoring and doing the time sequences for the Guinness Book of Records, they seem pretty confident. But yes, it's a timing issue as far as we're concerned. 7,700.
And how many, sorry?
16 at Rotorua town did the haka on the same day, so they had 16 people.
Oh, in China. Oh, okay. Okay. And the makeup of the 7,700, what was that?
Well, loosely, just about anyone who was there, ages a few months through to the very elderly. So, and a huge number of Lion supporters who actually commented that was something that they had targeted and they'll remember for a long, long time.
Reflective of our whole community.
Yes, huge
Thank
success.
you. Mr. Waru.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Morena noa ko Mont. Just, have you got any updates on how the Te Aomorangi team is going?
Yes, the Te Aomorangi team is continuing. We're continuing with our normal program, as we know, and of course the Noho Marae program, which was scheduled and we've held, and of course the next one in August. So yes, so the invitation, which of course, and Councillor Mark Gould might like to comment on his experience at the Noho Marae. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Marae visit for 2 days, I recommend all my council colleagues attend. The staff have gone through the process, they've gone through their 6th or 7th Marae visit. You get to understand what the Maori custom is, you get to understand what the Maori prayer is, you get to understand what Maori action songs are, and you also get to understand what Maori has gone through since 1840 on land confiscation, plus the Treaty of Waitangi claims, how it's trying to bring settlements together for the whole people of Rotorua. It also shows you how Rotorua is very treasured to have 36 maraes of Te Aroha people around the Rotorua region, and they do a lot of good for the Rotorua community.
Very pleasing to hear. So it sounds like you've had total immersion, Councillor Gore. Oh, yeah. Oh, he's working on that, don't worry. Yeah, well done, thank you. Someone like to move that Monty's report be received? Mr. Wari? I don't need to. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Monty. JP will move the report. Thanks, JP. Right. The strategy group on page 22. JP, of course, Una's in charge of governance, as you all know. Any questions or matters you want to highlight in your report there, JP?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Councillors, probably the story flows from that top of that page 22, and really it does start with the conclusion of the annual plan process that Una's been involved in. I think now with our focus on corporate planning, it's about getting ourselves ready, and there's been a number of questions about what is going to be the timetable and workshop frames for the long-term plan process. So that's what we pretty much immediately work into. There's just a note there that we had hoped to come back with the wording around the 2030 vision document after that feedback earlier than this, but obviously the pressures around the annual plan have just meant it carries forward into this month. So we're just looking to conclude that before we head into that long-term plan processing. Councillors, then of course you can also see what we've highlighted there in that next section as you go down through the page there. Some of the big moves we identified in the long-term in the annual plan, which have a direct implication into our long-term plan process as well. So obviously they become a focus in the next few months, so we can get them inputting successfully into the long-term plan discussions. So happy to answer any other questions across, I think I've got about 3 pages there, councillors. It goes through to about page 25.
I have one small question. The sanatorium reserve restoration, does that include, the stakeholders include DOC there, JP?
Yes, councillor.
Rotorua Tate.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, JP. The housing, the announcement, I think, in the last few days by Minister Macleay around the sort of becoming part of a national housing accord, which I notice Tauranga does have, Western Bay and Hamilton, I think, as well. So, but it really looks at, that is sort of more aimed at us getting our act together in terms of speedier processing of court resource consents, etc., which I would have thought we were actually on to anyway. That should be business as usual. That should be our core business and doing the best we can there. But who are we speaking to about maybe encouraging people to free up their land or to make their land available for development? Because it really is the availability of land. I mean, speeding up resource consents is one thing, but get hold of some land. So what are we doing in that regard?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a very good question, and I think it goes to the process that we're currently undertaking around the spatial plan. So a lot of that work we did in the discussion document, where we started to identify those blobs on maps that you've all seen, was starting for us to identify potential areas. Now that has meant some important conversations with a number of iwi trusts, but also to have some conversations with communities. As you're aware, there was a circle we drew on Nongataha, and we talked about urban expansion around Nongataha rather than transitioning into lifestyle blocks. So that becomes part of our next step into that long-term plan. So landowners who are under that area have been extremely interested in talking to us, so that's very positive. And for us, that leads us into that need to move reasonably quickly into producing our draft spatial plan. The other push for us, and I was looking at doing a presentation to the SPNF committee, was just to give you a summary of the feedback we got from the spatial plan feedback round, but also to talk briefly to what the implications are for us of being included as a medium growth council or urban area under that national policy statement. So that's what we're looking to bring back to SPNF committee meeting next week. So yes, we can traverse a lot of that then if that will be helpful.
Councillor Kawate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just another brief question, and it's on the community housing and the model that might likely be considered in the future. And I understand there's another meeting in July. When is that meeting? When do you propose holding that meeting? Because I'd like to be present at that.
Councillor, I think there's a meeting either today or tomorrow. I'll find out from Rosemary where she's up to with touching base with those groups who had come to that. I think Housing New Zealand or had coordinated or worked with Rosemary on the previous meeting, so about a month ago. So she was touching base with where those various groups are up to. So I can quickly, hopefully, get you a response that's either later today or tomorrow, and I'll see where we're up to.
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, JP. Just let me start off with this kōrero where Te Tatau is looking forward to being a part of the development of the 2018 to 2028 long-term plan. So, ka rawe, impacts and consequences of moving from, well, what are they, of moving from a low growth to a medium growth urban area under the provisions of the, what was it, MPS? What are they? I know you went for a hui the other day.
Yesterday were Jason, so manager of Consent Solutions, myself, and Chris Dillon, who's involved in spatial plan. We went to a workshop in Wellington with MB, also with MFE at the same time, who really took us through the requirements now under that national policy statement for us as a medium growth council. That was going to be the basis of the presentation I give you next week. But as an example, one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at the availability of development land and the feasibility of that land. So this fits exactly into what we're doing currently with the spatial plan about identifying new areas for both commercial and urban development. In regard to a medium growth requirement, you're required to look at the anticipated growth figures, but also include a buffer of between 15 and 20% on top of that to make sure that there is a reasonable supply to enable the market to work on hopefully bringing residential and commercial land to market. So there's a number of implications, some of which are reporting, so we have to report to MB, but mainly it's around that medium to longer term planning and ensuring there's the availability of land. So the work we're undertaking currently with the spatial plan is really important to that. As I say, I'll be looking to bring you more detail in a presentation to SPNF at our next meeting.
Kia ora, and just one more, I suppose it's more of a point of clarification. You've got here the development company. I'm not too sure what that is. Could you just sort of let me know what it is, please?
Yes, councillors.
Page 23, sorry.
Yeah, one of the big moves we had identified. So we two of them, and I'll use two of them together. One of them was to investigate the opportunities around a housing trust. So whether with council taking the lead or in partnership with some community groups. In a number of areas, what I call a CHIP, a community housing provider, has been very effective in receiving government money and in providing affordable and social housing. So we're looking at the Affordable and Social Housing Trust, and I've actually spoken to Te Tātou about that previously. So we've still got that underway, so that's an investigation that's currently underway. The development company option was also to look at some of the work that's been undertaken, particularly in areas of like Auckland, where they've sort of said, well, actually it's very difficult for councils to partner directly in joint venture and work with commercial developers to enable or to undertake development. And so one of the things that we want to do is have a workshop with council and come back with some options to say, look, we could set up a separate company, we could be more ambitious in what we do internally. So there's a number of options around there. So as an example, some councils have land holdings, which they put out into separate companies like a CCO. And they undertake some residential development themselves. So that's their way of sort of making sure, A, they can make revenue for councils, but also for them to directly impact on the supply of housing and residential properties to the market. So we're looking at having a workshop with you to explore those kind of options and garner your interest as a council in taking some of those steps. For us, it's one of the potential interventions to help address some of our growth and housing pressures. So that's why I've mentioned both of them at the same time. So housing accord, spatial planning, development company, and housing trust were all some of those key planks that kind of pull together as, hey, there's our potential actions that we can undertake for discussion. So that's a focus for July and August.
So Donaldson, you wanted to point something
Thank you, JB.
Okay. It's also included in here, Councillor Donaldson's a bit shy, but it's also included in here under big moves in terms of what council's intentions are. Who's next to speak? Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, 3 quick questions if I could, please. The development company, you've explained most of it. Stevie and Todd had a discussion not so long ago about low growth, medium growth. Is that included in this development company's possibilities?
Look, we have been moved because the national policy statement says that they look across at the latest projections for Statistics New Zealand. So Statistics New Zealand have provided us with growth figures that now put us in a growth band between 5 and 10% growth over the next 10 years. So that's why we've moved into that status of a medium growth council, and that requires us now to plan to have more land available, but also to provide some additional reporting back to MB and MFE. So those are our 2 cores. So that's part of that presentation I'll give you next week. But I think the key is how do we want to make sure we're using all the different tools to support and encourage that growth and manage the implications of it, which is that part of that development company. So I think I've talked around what does the development company mean, but I think it's quite important as a potential mechanism to help us address it.
Thank you, because it certainly has changed now that we go up to being a medium. Mr. Chairman, the Kaituna River document, I see the council it closes on the 24th. Rural Board would like to be involved, if they could be in some way, or look at the draft before it goes out, unless it's gone already.
I can certainly get you a copy of the draft as it's been produced, and would certainly appreciate your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last one, Mr. Oh, sorry.
Yes, Councillor, Mr. Martin.
Last one, Mr. Chairman, is
Sure.
the board appointments to the Rotorua Regional Airport Limited. When we were Trans-Tasman Airport, we actually had directors from outside of our Rohi area. Is the council intending to carry on with that, appointing directors from outside our area, or are we going to come back to being within our own people within our Rohi area?
So through the chair, on the matter of board appointments, what the process for council has been is to look at the skill mix required for all board appointments. So for example, recently there was appointments made to the Rotorua Economic Board where there was a mix of skills put forward. Some of those are about knowledge of Rotorua, the networks and so on, what's driving it. But equally so, some of those skills will also be about what's happening more broadly within the economic development area across New Zealand and connections with central government. So what you'll end up with in this, I think, is an ongoing appointment of a mix of people on our boards. Some of them will be local and will bring to the table local knowledge and local skills. Others of them may not be local and will be bringing a different perspective. And those mix of perspectives are needed in order to actually provide the governance oversight that we need for the various functions of the entities which are managed by CCOs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree in principle. The experience is what we need, but also I'm very mindful of what's happened with the airport as financially as well. So I'm a little bit intrepid of just where we're going to look for those sort of people. I don't want to see it stacked with people from the outside. I believe we've got to have directors and majority from within our area so they understand the Rotorua situation. Thank you.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, JP. I don't know how relevant this is, but while we're looking at special planning for more housing and more land availability, how are we coming to terms with, because in the annual plan there's nothing about the short-term and rental and batch care holiday homes. It hasn't been addressed, and It's such a major player at the market at the moment, and it seems like we're just hiding under policies, or nobody seems to have a definite answer on that, and people are getting really disgruntled now.
Through Mr. Chair, you've just been through your annual plan decision-making processes, and I think really you've confirmed that the 100-day threshold was quite important, and therefore there was also a need to look more carefully at identifying all of those properties and having those conversations, certainly from a rating perspective. And so that's a task for Thomas to take into this current year. So that's the focus. So that was the outcome of the annual plan process. Separate to that, and so putting on our district plan hat, we're still talking to some of those other councils who have brought in rules and policies around short-term accommodation, particularly in residential areas, and trying to examine what's good out of what they've done. We will bring those to the RMA Policy Committee for some further discussion as to whether they believe it's appropriate that we actually take a district plan approach to considering some rules. So that's what's going to happen over the next couple of months. So there's two streams of work, and hopefully you're reassured that there's two direct streams of work, which is Thomas's work around the rating and the seeking information on the 100 days. And there's also a second piece of work which is referring it back to the RMA Policy Committee to determine if we need to consider anything as far as a plan change is concerned.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Just a supplementary to that, while we go through another couple of months of deliberating as to what the reports will be, is there in any way, because Mr. Rolf from Tio Tonga was wondering, so I read that he's put it on Facebook, thousands and thousands of people around the country and the world are looking at it and thinking, hey, look, we're not adequately addressing this problem. So is there any way that the Tio Tonga problem could be solved by actually writing to them or communicating to them as a group to say, hey, look, this is what we are doing, so they get some finite answers, please?
Through Mr. Chair, look, I think there has been some specific meetings, but I think what you're suggesting is another conversation with that group in that area, and I think that's probably quite valid and quite important. That
I'm happy to assist with that as well. JP, I have had a number of people from throughout the country. One guy in particular from Lower Hutt say, why did we go for 100 days? Because 100 days is every weekend. And it's exactly what Mr. Rolf, he's not the only one, but other communities in Holdens Bay, Annas Bay, right round the district are facing, has been inundated, particularly on long weekends and weekends, with up to 20 or 30 people in a residential setting. And they said, they rang and said, well, we didn't buy a house next door to a motel, we bought a house next door to a residential property. So, I think where Councillor Kumar is coming from, we need to get on with the debate as soon as possible and get a paper to SPNF to give some direction to where we head. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would disagree that we're not doing anything. It was one of the discussions in our annual plan consultation document, and we went through that. And it's important to separate two issues. One is the rating equity issue, and the other is the district plan effects on neighbours. And look, right just today, there is a meeting between council officers and the chief executive of one of these online rental properties around a possible code of conduct for the properties in their portfolio. I won't say which one it is. So that work is underway, and council is working on it. We did undertake in the long-term plan workshops that we would, as part of the rating review that 100-day policy, but in the interim, we've signalled that we will more proactively enforce that 100-day policy going forward. And
Mr. Chair, just again, it's important just to get the message out to the community. I was approached last night at a public meeting we had on the plan change around noise, describing some challenges they were having at a property in Linmore with a B&B or a Booker Batch near them. And I sort of said, look, the important thing that you can do as a neighbour is if you're experiencing noise and traffic and people issues in your street, ring up, make sure you lodge a noise complaint, but it would be helpful for us if that person had also said, and the reason why it is so noisy and I am complaining is because there's X number of people, there's X number of cars, and it is a book a batch or a holiday rental. Just so we get the information that I can then pass on through our customer centre. A, we address the noise complaint, but secondly, we can make sure that Thomas's rating team are aware of that property and they have an opportunity to write to the owner to say, we understand your property is being used for this purpose, can you provide us with some additional information? So we just make sure our left and our right hand have the information that's required.
Thank you, JB. Thank you, Councillor Kumar, for raising it. Any other questions? Councillor Gould?
Mr Chair, thank you for your report, JP. Page 24, Economic Growth Portfolio. When you talk, I'm following up on Bob Martin's question about board appointments. To me, the Rotorua Regional Airport, I thought would be better under the Destination Rotorua group, because they've got 6 directors already appointed. You know, we've got you'll have two good boards, and to me the airport board haven't achieved the Wellington flight at 7 a.m. in the morning, and it might be better with the Destination Rotorua people with that board making that one of their priorities, so that they can convince Air New Zealand that Rotorua does need a 7 a.m. flight to Wellington, and you know, all that the airport can discuss is possible planes coming in. You know, Jetstar have told Rotorua we're not interested at the moment, so there's nothing really on that horizon.
Point of order, Mr Chairman. I'm sorry I don't mean to be offensive, but I just find that's, we have a board, we have got 2 boards, they've been approved and sanctioned by this council, so really I think I think your comments are a little inappropriate.
I think you're out of order too, Councillor Gould. The operational side of the airport company has been delegated to a CCO, and your personal thoughts and what your thinkings are on what they should be doing, maybe you should take that up with the chief executive of that particular CCO. I like with what Councillor Kumar has just said with regard to the book of batch things. I mean, these are issues that should be taken up directly with officers. John Paul has got the answers in terms of, I understood all that data was being collected anyway, but the public need to know that that we're here to listen to them and to react to issues that are confronting them. So you're out of order in terms of making a statement. If you've got a question, Councillor Good, I'm more than happy to hear it.
Two questions. One, when's the appointments going to be? And 2, does the Impicor present board carry on until your appointments are made?
Councillors, again, I'm not completely across it all. My understanding is we have a number of vacancies across the 2 boards, so they're not complete board changeovers, so we try to avoid that. And as you're aware, we've just been through the Rotorua Economic Development Board refresh, so there was 3 members who have changed in there. The chair has remained the same, and a couple of other members have remained the same. So we keep that kind of, if we're going to transition, we transition so there is a continuity to that. So as far as the time frame is concerned, we're using an external company who has been involved in that process previously, and who assisted us with the board recruitment for Rotorua Economic Development. So we're looking at undertaking that process across the next month. So we're probably looking at this stage as coming back to you with some recommendations probably in early September.
Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Are there any other questions in the report up to the end of the creative portfolio on page 25 that anyone has, please? Yes, Chief Executive would like to make a comment.
Look, if I can just help with regards to the discussion around CCOs, we do have a quarterly reporting system where the CCOs come before you and present where they are, the strategy work that they've undertaken and so on. I understand that will happen next month for all of our CCOs, so if you've got questions that you would like to know about with regards to the work that the CCOs are doing, that's probably a very good time to put those to them.
Chief, I think that summed it up very, very nicely. Any further questions for John Paul? Okay, thank you. Thomas, would you like to come forward with the Business Support Group report at the bottom of page 25 through to the conclusion of 26? Yep. Yeah, and then it's Infrastructure Group with Stavros. Would you like to highlight anything on the report, Thomas? Questions? Councillor Kent, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To you, I have two questions. I see that with the ERP update for property and rating due to be released in August, and you make the comment there that Wellington City Council has indicated it's delayed implementation of the new software version and that we might be an early adopter. Does that mean we're going to be the guinea pig?
That was our fear, but we've gone back to Tech One and they've provided us information where we'd effectively be the 9th council coming on board, but we did want to follow in Wellington's footsteps because they're obviously bigger than us and more resource than us and would hopefully get
thank you. That puts my mind to rest on that one. The general evaluation, do we have a date for when it's intended that the revised evaluations will be available to the public?
It's usually November.
Yes, sometime later. I can't remember the exact date, but it is in line with exactly what we do every 3 years, and I think they, in the process of getting finalised over the next 2 months, and then they will be issued generally, I think, around the end of October, but I'll confirm that for you.
Yeah. I know because I follow it very strictly. It is October, November when they're released, and people have until the end of January to either appeal their new valuations, which then take effect on the 1st of July 2018. Okay, so our rating up until the end of this financial year, it doesn't kick in until, that's why we always do a rates review, isn't it, Councillor Donaldson, leading up to the new valuations, because we've got all the data. So we're 6 months ahead of the process, which was really good, subject to that, subject to appeals. Okay, Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, through you please, I'm on to the museum again. I asked for a workshop if it was possible. We were told basically that may take place after the engineers had done their structural assessments.
I'm going to stop you there, Bob. We're going to, I'm more than ready for you to ask that question in confidential, but all those matters will be covered. They cannot answer you because of the financial and planning and tenders and all sorts of information that have to encompass it in the answer. I know where you're heading, and I'll allow you to do that in confidential, if you don't mind.
Confidential?
Yes, yes, please. Thank you. Okay, any other questions regarding... Thank you, Mr. Colley. That was short and sweet. Pretty painless. No blood on the floor. Now we'll wait for Mr. Stavros Michael. Won't be any blood on the floor here either. Any questions on Mr. Michael's report? And Mr. Michael, if you'd like to highlight any matters relating to the report, it's pretty extensive.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would like, I'll take the report as read. There are 4 or 5 items I would like to talk briefly about them, and happy to take any questions, following from that. Firstly, on the issue of transport planning, especially our corridor planning. Over the next few months, we will begin to make detailed progress with regards to the interventions on Sala, Tarawera, and the 4-laning, all the way to Arles Roads. In parallel with that, we're starting the detailed engagement and design for the revocation of Amo House streets that goes from Fenton to Ranulph Street and all the way to Old Tarpo Road. That has got a price tag of about $11 million, and the expectation is that physical works should be starting early in the new calendar year in 2018. Again, consistent with what my colleague JP was saying earlier, I think we need to be cognizant of a couple of things as selected members. One is that the fact that we're starting work at the moment on the main intersections of Sala, Tarawera, and Amahouse Street, it does not mean that there's no additional work that is concurrently taking place at the moment, especially with the detailed assessment of the four-lane, expectations all the way to the airport. That is our objective, is to four-lane, that corridor all the way to the airport. And that, of course, married and coupled with our spatial planning in that area, it needs, one needs to inform the other. So our expectation is that over the next 1 to 5 years, we should be seeing a continuous program of work that will lead to the four-laning all the way to the airport, including the airport roundabout, that will accommodate the last 2 years increased traffic, demand we've seen. I remember a couple of years ago, the forward traffic demand was about 0.9%. In the last couple of years, the average annual traffic demand rose to about 4.6%. And if you look into our spatial plan expectations, obviously that would add additional pressure onto our corridors. So this council needs to continue we continue to receive updates on these works, and therefore, it's the fact that we see some segments of the work taking place, in some specific areas. There is also planning and design work, to continue our program in that respect. The second item I wanted to highlight is that, as you are aware, we are now into about a year and a half for implementing our urban cycleway strategy and the network. 17-18 is year 3. We started with an expectation that we will achieve a significant improvement especially to the way young children, at the age of 5 to 18, commute to and from their schools. And I'll remind us that we have about 16,000 children in that age group. And when we started the process, we started installing use monitors, and in recent times, especially with the UCP program funders, when they came out to check our progress in that respect, and again, bearing in mind that we only partially in our completion network, the early indicators is that we have achieved about 180% increase in children using bikes to school. Now, while that is, is quite a significant percentage, our targets in terms of our funding process is about 300% increase by the time we finish our network. We've got about 16,000 children. Our aim is to have at least 10% of these kids traveling to school by walking or by cycling, compared to 2 or 3% we historically had. So the early indications it seems that it indicates that we are halfway on our target, and are very encouraging. The third item I wanted to highlight is that we are now in the process of our request for proposal for RFP. Again, this has been reported in early O&M reports for our parking facilities and services. The RFP should be expected to close towards the end of July, first week of August. The overall objectives of that is to modernize our facilities, to provide better pay and display machines, or pay by plate rather than pay and display, to give us more accurate indications about utilization and occupancy of services. And the important things we are asking the market, to fund those changes instead of us putting the capital into that. So I will report back to that in, hopefully by late August about the outcome of that RFP. And we're quite sort of hopeful that we're going to have some good and innovative proposals on the table for us. The fourth thing I wanted to report, obviously, informed by the Havelock water inquiry, we continue to assess our water safety procedures and our standard operational procedures to ensure that we don't have any particular risk. Mr. Chair noted earlier about the chlorination and the UV treatment of our water supply, and obviously those things should not be taken for granted. There is a need for an ongoing vigilance and ongoing testing and ongoing verification that we actually don't have any gaps in our procedures. And again, there is a significant interest from not at the national level, the international level, about the quality and the health of the water supply. The fourth item relates to our ongoing processes for wastewater, which again is not unrelated to the quality of our water. Obviously, the Rotorua resource consent process is taking place next week on the 11th and 12th. the hearing process, and the expectation is that, once, that consent has been granted, we'll proceed to the tendering and the installation of the Rotorua and the waste treatment plant in that area. And we're also hoping by August or September to begin the resource hearing applications for our inner city waste treatment plant. And of course, that's a significant component of our lakes water quality program we're working as a region. Again, that will generate a significant body of activities and works to make sure we will achieve our goals in that respect. So all these areas are in process. We are talking extensively with the hapus around the lake with regards to the land conduct system to ensure that we meet cultural expectations and appropriate stewardship procedures. But again, we do expect to have those in place by August, September when we lodge our application for resource for the treatment plant. The rest of this, my report, happy to take any questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Just one for myself on waste management, Stavros. Thank you for the analysis of the analysis taken of the refuse bins, and I note that 50% of the analysis was organic waste. So that's all going to landfill, is it not?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
So you say further on, the results of the analysis will be used to explore ways to reduce residual waste. So when will that sort of, because I'm championing the inorganic, which you can't monitor anyway because you haven't got statistics, because it's not put in the bin, obviously. But I heard of a case where someone actually put an inorganic item in the bin and it nearly wrecked a truck in Lower Hutt. They put a diff in, and because it emptied it, and apparently it sorts it somehow, I don't know what's inside the truck, but it absolutely wrecked the truck. And I certainly don't want that to happen here. But so you're going to come back to us eventually with strategies in terms of reducing that 50% inorganic by either having a green top bin, or are those the sorts of things you're going to be talking to the community about?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you still recall, in December when we approved our waste management strategy, we identified a number of work streams to explore. And again, bearing in mind we are now into also month 7 of our new program. What we've done in March and April, we took some random waste wheelie bins, just to have a look to see what are the contents are. And we identified that 50% is organic material, grass and food waste and things like that. And also another 18% of material could be recycled. But also remember, in our end of the year report, we are projecting our amount of recyclables pulling out of the waste stream will be close to about 5,500 tons, on average, on an annual basis. And our goal is to reach the 7,000, i.e. about 75% of all the household waste generated, we should be able to recover through recycling. Now we are probably getting to 60% at the moment. There's another 20% we can extract with the right education, with the right programs and so on. But we'll come back to you with options for further green waste separation. And if through your LTP you want to consider inorganic collections, it's a matter to consider.
Much, Stavros. It's the best answer I've had yet. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. Stavros, just on page 27 on the transport capital projects there, I note the last bullet point, NZTA has approved some emergency funding for remediation of structural repairs related to the storm damage, which is great to see. Does that make a significant mitigation of the operational deficit that we've had reported earlier, is the first part of the question? And also, I note the first bullet point, the Rolfe Road seal extension. Will that all be dovetailed into one project when you address? I mean, it's been great to see the reduction in road cones around the district with all the slips being cleared, etc. But I understand Paradise Valley is one of the more challenging ones to sort out.
3 questions, I suppose. One is that the emergency funding for NZTA, I'm not sure if the councils are familiar with the NZTA processes. Every year when we apply for funding, we apply on activities. It's not just a lump sum amount of money given to us. We apply for maintenance, for renewals, for capital upgrades, and for emergency works or safety works. So when we, for the current financial year, the next financial year, our emergency works were of a certain magnitude. Of course, when we got hit by, in March and April with the weather storms, that sort of provision was inadequate, obviously, to deal with it. And we have to apply to NZTA to recognize that as a storm event, aftermath. And they will pay us the emergency funding, which means that for the first $1 million, I think it's about 53% subsidy, and after the first $1 million is 75% subsidy. So they have agreed to do that. The financial impact of that will come in 17-18, not in the current financial year. Ralph Road, yes, we've done the drainage works, and we expect the seal extension program to take place in October, when the weather is appropriate this year, and that will conclude Ralph Road. And gradually we do all the works, we plan to do.
Councillor Gould.
Chair, to do with page 27, brief status update on other transport capital projects. The Dodds Road seal extension, on the second line you've got for next year's seal extension. Do you mean this year's seal extension, 2017-2018, or do you mean 2018-2019?
17-18, Councillor, because this report relates to the early May, early June. So when we're writing this report, it relates to that period. So 17-18, the current financial year, sorry. So we're a few weeks behind the...
Two further questions. Construction on the Rotorua footpath extension is complete. That particular walkway is very close to a national highway. Have you got plans to put some sort of fence or some sort of protection between the road and the footpath? Because at night time you can hardly see anybody walking along the road if they don't wear the correct gear.
If you would recall that the first part of Rotorua heading from west to east, there's already an existing footpath which got some road markers. There's no fence or guardrails or walls or anything like that. We are in contact and discussion with NZTA and their NOC contractor to see what's the appropriate demarcation lines to put down there. I don't anticipate to be guardrails or wires, but certainly road markers, edge markers, should be put in place.
With the Paradise Valley problem, is the culverts going to be brought up in the confidential section? Because when it happened in March and it's now July.
In terms of answering that question, I mean, you're not there to judge whether something should be held in confidential or not. Chief Executive, have you got any comment on that? His question was, is the Paradise Valley culvert situation, I don't know what that means, going to be discussed? Is it going to be brought up in confidential?
I think there's been some public reporting actually on this matter, and the key point that is actually sitting in the middle of it is that this is privately owned infrastructure primarily. So Stavros's team has actually worked with the property owners to look at what assistance this organisation can provide, and we've certainly offered some assistance. But beyond that, I don't think it would be appropriate to go into what is effectively a private matter.
27, we heard initially about from JP in the previous report about the spatial plan and the indications on opening up land in the Nongataha area, and certainly the community out there has agreed that certain tracks should and shouldn't be, etc. So if the spatial plan comes out and says and identifies potential for, say, another 4,000 people living out the northern side of Nongataha and or Hamarana or in between or wherever, will that have an impact on the priority with the four-laning of Nongataha to Mitai?
Yes, absolutely, and that's what I was saying, insinuating earlier, is that we've got a current pressure on our corridors. The spatial plan will put additional pressure onto that, and that will ensure that we have an ongoing justification for increasing capacity on the corridors, and therefore that's important.
Thank you, Stavros. You're making my day today. Any other questions? Someone like to move that the operational... Oh, no, we're a bit early yet. Okay, I'm jumping the gun again. We go on to Henry on page 29 under the operational group. Thank you, Stavros. Welcome, Henry. Henry's area is page 29, 30 and the top of 31.
So,
Welcome.
good morning, councillors, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, again, I'm taking it as read, and probably just the 2 or 3 things I'd highlight are the first item around the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre. We've obviously dealt with that in previous meetings, but that work was completed, unfortunately, as predicted. So it was shut for a couple of weeks. We did have to cancel one event, but apart from that, events were able to be accommodated elsewhere. And going into the building now, you wouldn't even notice the propping that's in there. Under the museum, again, you'll see the range of activities which are focused really on the work they're carrying out beyond their walls, and probably culminating in the recognition at the Community Awards event of the volunteers who are running the tours around the government gardens as the Supreme Award winners. And the other thing, I guess, it's been touched on in Monty's report is the Lions. The Lions match and the weekend of events that surrounded that, and just a couple of bits of feedback we got initially were that this was a weekend that really sparked the tour from the point of view of outside the region. So this was the event that was seen to have actually given life to the tour as a whole, which was pretty cool to hear. And again, we've had some initial early feedback from the rugby union that it was really well received.
In no small way, your team played a part in ensuring that event was successful. Rotorua is absolutely full of Lions supporters even today. So whoever strategically placed the games, 2 in Wellington and another test in Auckland, they've got to come back through the central North Island in their little vans, and the town is just packed. So the flow-on impact, Rotorua must have made an impression, because a lot of these people, I've spoken to several of them in the car park just yelling out, "Are you All Black supporters?" "Oh no!" That gets a reaction, but they certainly have come back to Rotorua because they said in the short time they were here for the Maoris game, they couldn't see everything. So there's been huge flow-on effects from that, so that's really good. I just wondered how long the World War I Te Arawa Memorial Restoration Project, how long that's going to take, because I notice all the surrounds have been removed, and has it been completed in terms of what they're going to do, or is there more work to be done?
Mr. Chair, I'm not actually sure about that. Monty might be able to fill us in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just do have a couple of questions, and it's around the major events, and I think, yes, you're right, Rotorua has certainly been pumping, but it is just because we're a major player in the events, obviously, that take place when we get significant numbers of people coming into town. I just wonder if we could canvass a little wider on some of the feedback, and I'm particularly thinking about the Lions versus the Māori All Blacks, and there was some feedback passed to me that I thought we do need to hear about that, and it's not just the rugby union, it's just some of the businesses, particularly where there was a lot of activity in that, so I just hope that we're receptive. Most of it, I would have to say that virtually all of the feedback was positive, but there were just some things that we could do better next time, and it's really important, I think, that we hear that. So I just wanted to pass that on to you. But my question is in regards to the Lake Rotorua Hot Springs Limited, and I don't know whether Councillor Hunt wants to, but I've taken an interest, like we all have taken an interest in this consent. And has a decision been determined yet? And has that been made public? I'm not sure, but I'd be really interested to hear about that. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
It has been made public, and the licence was granted for that. There were no objections from the police, medical officer of health, nor the inspector, nor the landowner. And while there were community objections, the applicant met the conditions under Section 105 of the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. So the appeal process is still open. There are 10 days, and all of the submitters, there were 50, 5 who chose to attend and speak to their objections. They have an opportunity, they've all been given the decision, and they have an opportunity to appeal that to ALA, the Alcohol Regulatory Authority. So we'll know in a week or so whether there have been any appeals and what the next steps will be.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just ask, in that case, if there should be an appeal lodged by one of them, does that come before your committee, or no, it goes then to a higher?
It goes straight to ALA, and then they decide whether to uphold the objection, whether to amend the decision, or whether to leave the decision as it stands. And if it then goes to an unappealed decision, becomes essentially able to be used in any other decision making, and often those decisions are quoted.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Hunt.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Thank you for backtracking there. Kia ora hoa. Just my question relates to the library and the Child Health Hub. How are we doing in terms of our budget on that project? Are you able to answer that?
Yep, we're tracking according to budget.
Which leads me into my next question. I believe there's there's some significant artworks that are to be commissioned, and there was quoted or that there was a blowout in the budget because they weren't council are unable to contribute to those financially to the making of those artworks. Therefore, we've had to find iwi monies to do so. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Councillors, I think the last time I presented to the committee, I talked through where we were up to with the design of the building, and I also identified in that a number of funding applications that we were going out with. So there was about 900,000 of additional elements that we were looking to put on top of what we considered the core library, and a lot of that was also the artwork. But it also was a number of interactive things for the discovery space, technology, and those sort of applications. So we've got a number of funding bids out at the moment, and we've been well supported by Ngāmahinga Toi, who have helped us with ensuring that we have a key design representations coming into the library, but also they have been front and centre actually in going out and seeking external funding as well. So we're moving through the Fletcher's design work, Fletcher's delivery of the contract for the library. We've been working through with them the additional elements which start moving out into the park. So this is the Jean Batten Park. So we'll be bringing a report back to council I think the end of this month, just seeking a contract sign-off for the Jean Batten Park development. Your comments now are, as I say, we're trying to just work through our budgets and balancing the question of how much is within this core budget we've got and how much do we anticipate to get from external funding sources. So that's the juggling act that you may have heard about. So that's just putting some pressure on us from a timing perspective. It would have been nice to have gone off and had confirmation around a number of funding elements earlier this year, but here we are with sort of 4 or 5 months to go. So it is a juggling act. So that's where we're up to, and we're staying in close contact with Ngāmahinga Toi, but also using Council's arts coordinator, Mark Spiker-Bosch, to coordinate the commissioning and the contracting of works as well.
Kia ora, JP. So just to clarify, so we're on budget and we're seeking external funding to do those artworks. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thank you, Henry, for your report. May I suggest you send a letter of thank you to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council over the free use day on the Maori All Black game, both for the World Haka Challenge and for the game afterwards. The letter should probably 2 letters, one to the staff and one to the councillors of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council for subsidising that particular day.
It's an operational manager. I'm sure Mr Weston will take that into account. There are a lot of people who need to be thanked on that day. And what Councillor Rotorua Tate, in talking with staff, subsequent in the sport and recreation area, there are a number of lessons that can be learned about the disposal of the people. But put it into reality, there were 21,887 people there at the Rotorua International Stadium, which was more than went to the Waikato game. And it's not often we get to have to dispose of those people. And your point, Councillor Gould, in a letter of thanks to the Regional Council, I think that's a worthy suggestion that they put the free buses on. But our staff orchestrated and asked for that and made sure that that was an aspect that took part. Is that right, Henry?
Yep, that is right. And also probably just to put your minds a little bit at rest, we also have run fairly extensive debrief processes around all elements of the weekend, so we will be absolutely looking how we can make the improvements we need to do.
Operational report from May to June 2017 be received. Councillor Rotorua Tate, Mr Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. Carried. And thank you to staff for being here to answer any of those curly questions, which were done very, very well. Would someone like to move as per the general subject of each matter to be considered while the public is excluded? The reason for passing this resolution is in relation to each matter and specified grounds under section 48(1). The operational report, here it is. To enable any local government, any local authority holding information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations. Would someone like to move that we move into confidential? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Seconded, Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. So I'll move you. Oh, good. Yes.